As the weeks passed, the small town that had once been a hollow shell of forgotten dreams began to change. It wasn't a dramatic transformation, but it was noticeable. With every little task Eleanor and William completed, the town slowly came back to life. The crumbling buildings were repaired, the streets were cleared, and small gardens began to sprout in the places where there had once only been dust. The ghost town was beginning to look less like a forgotten relic and more like a place where people could live again. At first, there were just the two of them, working side by side. The mornings were quiet, with the soft sounds of tools clinking and the hum of the forge filling the air. Eleanor had grown accustomed to the work, and she found herself stronger, not just physically, but in ways she hadn't expected. The uncertainty she had once felt had begun to fade, replaced by a steady sense of purpose. Every nail hammered into place, every patch of earth turned felt like a small victory, a step toward something new. As they worked, Eleanor and William continued to talk, sometimes in silence, sometimes sharing stories from their pasts. William rarely spoke about his life before the town, but Eleanor didn't press him. She didn't need to know all the details. She understood that everyone had their own burdens, their own reasons for seeking a new life. What mattered now was that they had found a shared purpose. One day, as they worked in the garden behind the cabin, Eleanor looked up at the sky. The sun was shining brightly and the air was warm, a welcome change from the cold winds of winter. The town was quiet, as it often was, but there was something different about it today. There was a sense of hope in the air, something tangible. For the first time, Eleanor felt like she could truly call this place home. "I think we've done it," she said, wiping her brow with the back of her hand. "The town is starting to look like it's lived in again. People are going to come." William, who had been digging nearby, paused and looked up at her. His expression was hard to read, but his eyes softened as they met hers. "You're right," he said, his voice low but steady. "It's taken a while, but we're getting there." Eleanor smiled. She had known from the start that it wouldn't be easy. There had been moments when she felt like giving up, when the weight of the task before them seemed too much to bear. But with William by her side, those moments felt more manageable. They had worked together side by side, and in doing so, they had built something more than just a town. They had built a foundation, a place to start over, a place where they could both find peace. Over the next few months, the town did begin to change. People started to trickle in, travelers, some looking for work, others just passing through. They saw what Eleanor and William had accomplished and realized that there was something here worth staying for. Slowly, a small community began to form, one built on the work of two people who had decided not to give up, no matter how difficult it seemed. Eleanor didn't know where it would go from here, but she knew that she was no longer the same person who had arrived in that empty town. She had left her old life behind, and in doing so, she had discovered strength she didn't know she had. She had taken control of her future, one step at a time, and she had found not just a home, but a new family, one made up of the people she worked alongside. One evening, as they sat on the porch of the cabin, watching the sun set over the mountains, Eleanor turned to William. The sky was a mixture of orange and purple, and the air was cool but pleasant. "I never thought I would find peace here," she said quietly. "I thought I was running away from everything. But now I feel like I'm building something real." William was silent for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was softer than usual. "Sometimes you have to leave everything behind to find what you're looking for. It's not about the place, it's about what you make of it." Eleanor nodded, her eyes on the horizon. She had spent so much time in the past trying to escape, but now she understood that it wasn't the town or the people that had been the problem. It was her own expectations. She had come here hoping for a quick escape, but what she found was far more valuable, a life she had built herself with her own hands. And with it, she had found a sense of purpose she had never known before. As the days passed, the town continued to grow. More people arrived, bringing with them skills, ideas, and energy. Some were farmers, others were builders, and a few were merchants looking for a place to start over. With each new person, the town came closer to being a real community, a place where people could live and work together, not just survive, but thrive. For Eleanor, the change wasn't just in the town. It was in herself. She had arrived unsure, desperate for something to give her life meaning. But now she felt like she had found that meaning. She had faced her fears, and in doing so, she had found not just a place to live, but a reason to keep going. She had learned that even in the hardest moments, even in the darkest times, there was always a chance to start over. It might not be easy and it might not be what she expected, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that she had made it her own. One evening, as they stood together in the town square, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Eleanor turned to William. He was standing close, his silhouette outlined against the setting sun. There was a quiet strength in him, in the way he stood, in the way he had helped her rebuild this town. She had come here thinking she would find a man who would save her, but what she had found instead was someone who had shown her that she could save herself. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice filled with gratitude. "For everything." William glanced at her, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "You don't need to thank me. We did this together." And in that moment, Eleanor knew that he was right. They had built something together, something that had started with nothing and had become something beautiful. The future wasn't certain, but it was theirs to shape, and together they would continue to build side by side, day by day. The sun had finally set, leaving the town bathed in the soft glow of the evening light. For the first time since she had arrived, Eleanor didn't feel lost anymore. She felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be, and in that quiet moment with William by her side, she realized that sometimes the best way to find your way home was to build it yourself. The days that followed Eleanor's arrival at William's cabin were filled with a quiet routine. The cabin was small and simple, but it was warm and dry, and it gave her the shelter she desperately needed. William didn't speak much, but his presence was steady, like a rock in the middle of a storm. He worked at his forge, crafting tools and repairing whatever was broken in the town, while Eleanor tried to make herself useful. She wasn't a skilled blacksmith like William, but she had learned to make do with what she had. She tended to small tasks around the cabin, cleaning, gathering what little firewood there was, and starting to organize the few belongings she had brought with her. Each morning they shared breakfast in silence. There was something comforting about the stillness of the mornings. The world outside was quiet too, as though the town itself was holding its breath. As they ate, Eleanor would look out of the window, her thoughts drifting to the life she had left behind. She missed her family, the noise of the city and the bustle of daily life. But at the same time, she felt a strange sense of peace here. It wasn't the life she had imagined, but it was a life nonetheless. One afternoon, after a long day of working on the cabin, William asked if she wanted to help him in the forge. Eleanor wasn't sure what she could offer. Her hands were delicate, not built for the kind of work William did, but she agreed. There was something about the way he worked, his movements precise and steady, that made her want to learn. She stood beside him, watching as he heated a piece of metal in the fire. The orange glow lit up his face, and for the first time, Eleanor saw the deep lines on his face more clearly, the evidence of years of hard work, of a life spent doing things that required more than just physical strength. It took patience, skill, and a kind of quiet determination. "Don't just watch," William said, breaking the silence. "If you're going to be here, you might as well learn how to help." Eleanor hesitated, but something in his voice made her want to try. She reached for the small hammer beside her, lifting it awkwardly. William guided her hands, showing her how to strike the metal with just the right amount of force. Her first few attempts were clumsy, and the metal made a sharp jarring sound as it hit the anvil, but William didn't say anything. He simply guided her again, showing her how to move with the rhythm of the work. After a while, Eleanor began to get the hang of it. The metal softened with each strike, bending to her will. She was still far from skilled, but she felt a small sense of accomplishment. It was the first time in a long while that she felt like she was contributing, like she had a purpose. As the days passed, Eleanor found herself spending more time in the forge, learning from William. He didn't talk much about his past, but sometimes, as they worked side by side, he would share small details. He talked about how he had come to the town years ago, looking for something different, something to escape. He had settled in the ghost town because it was quiet, and no one asked him questions. It was a place where he could work with his hands and keep to himself. But over the years, the town had slowly emptied, and now it felt like he was the last one left, holding on to a place that had no future. Eleanor didn't say much in return. She didn't have the words to explain why she had come here, why she had chosen to leave everything behind. But she felt a connection to William. He too was trying to build something out of the nothing that surrounded them, He was someone who had lost a lot but kept going, kept working, and slowly, Eleanor began to realize that she wasn't so different from him. One evening, as they sat by the fire in the small cabin, the conversation shifted. The air had turned cold, and the fire crackled in the hearth, casting a soft glow around the room. Eleanor looked up at William, her mind filled with questions she hadn't asked before. "Do you ever think about leaving?" she asked quietly, breaking the silence. William didn't answer right away. He stared into the fire, his face softened by the light. It was clear he was thinking, weighing the question carefully. "Leaving?" he repeated almost to himself. "I think about it sometimes. But where would I go? I've been here too long now. This place. It's a part of me. It may be broken, but it's still mine." Eleanor nodded, her gaze drifting toward the window. The wind had picked up outside, howling through the empty streets of the town. The sound was lonely, almost mournful, but Eleanor didn't feel afraid. She understood what William meant. She too felt a connection to this place, even if it wasn't what she had imagined. It was flawed, it was empty, but it was also real, and perhaps that was enough. "I came here looking for a new life," Eleanor said after a long pause, "but it's not what I thought it would be. I thought it would be easier, I guess. I thought I would find someone to make everything better." William's eyes flickered toward her. "There's no one else who can make it better for you, Eleanor. You have to make it better yourself. You're the one who decides what happens next." Eleanor felt a pang of truth in his words. She had spent so much time waiting for something to change, for someone to come and fix everything. But the truth was, she had been the one who had chosen this path. She had come here, and now it was up to her to make it work. The next day, as the sun rose over the horizon, Eleanor woke with a new sense of determination. She had spent enough time mourning the life she had left behind. It was time to start building something new. She couldn't do it alone, but she didn't have to. She had William, and together they could make something of this place. They worked side by side, fixing up the town, one small task at a time. They repaired the buildings, planted small gardens, and even started to clear the streets, hoping to bring a little life back to the abandoned town. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't glamorous, but every day they made progress. And with each little victory, Eleanor felt something inside her begin to shift. She was no longer just a woman stranded in a ghost town. She was a part of something. She was creating a future for herself, one step at a time. As time went on, other travelers began to pass through the town. Some stayed for a few days, others longer. Word began to spread that the town wasn't as empty as it seemed. Slowly but surely, the small community began to grow again. It wasn't the life Eleanor had imagined, but it was hers. It was real, and it was something she had helped create. One evening, as she and William sat on the porch watching the sun set over the town they had worked so hard to rebuild, Eleanor felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had found her place here, not by waiting for someone else to fix things, but by getting her hands dirty and doing it herself. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she belonged. And for the first time, she realized that sometimes the best way to create a future was to start with what you have, and build it from the ground up. Eleanor spent the next few days wandering the empty streets, the weight of the situation slowly settling on her shoulders. She had never imagined that her dream of a fresh start would feel so heavy. The town's silence echoed in her ears, and it seemed as if even the wind was hesitant to break the stillness. She had arrived with hope, with excitement, but now she was left with a deep sense of uncertainty and isolation. She tried to keep herself busy. There were a few remnants of life here and there, small patches of land that once might have been gardens, a broken wagon, abandoned tools, but most of the town was simply a shell of what it once was. Some days she would go to the abandoned houses, hoping to find something useful, anything to make her feel like she had a purpose. Other days she would sit by the old saloon, watching the sun slowly sink beneath the hills, wondering where Samuel had gone and why he hadn't come back. But the answers never came. It was on one of these long, quiet afternoons when Eleanor stumbled across the blacksmith's shop. She hadn't noticed it before, hidden behind a cluster of half-destroyed houses, but that day something drew her to it. The air was thick with the scent of metal, and the rhythmic sound of a hammer striking metal echoed out into the street. At first, Eleanor wasn't sure what she was hearing. She hadn't seen anyone in the town for days, and the sound was so out of place that it took her a moment to realize that someone, perhaps the only person left in town, was still working. Curiosity tugged at her, and she found herself walking toward the forge. As she drew closer, the figure of a man came into view. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and a weathered face that told stories of long, hard years. His hands were calloused, his arms muscular, and the blacksmith's apron he wore was stained with the evidence of a day's labor. He moved with quiet precision, each strike of the hammer purposeful and steady. Eleanor stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. She had never met him before. She had heard whispers of a man living on the edge of town, but no one had said much about him. He seemed like someone who kept to himself, someone who didn't welcome visitors. But as the hammer fell again, Eleanor couldn't help herself. She took a step forward, her boots crunching on the gravel as she approached the door. She hesitated for a moment before calling out softly. "Excuse me," she said, her voice tentative but clear. "Are you the blacksmith?" The man paused, looking up from his work. His gaze was steady, almost like he had been expecting someone, but his face was unreadable. It took him a moment to respond, and when he did, his voice was deep and rough, like it hadn't been used much lately. "Depends on who's asking," he said. His eyes lingered on her for a second before he returned to his work. "What do you need?" Eleanor wasn't sure how to answer. She had so many questions, so many thoughts swirling in her head. She had come to the town looking for Samuel, and instead she had found this man. He wasn't what she had expected. He wasn't the kind of person who would offer comfort or easy conversation. He was rough around the edges, a man who seemed to carry a weight of his own, but there was something in the way he carried himself that made her believe he was someone who had faced hardship and survived. I'm new here," Eleanor said, taking a cautious step closer. "I'm looking for answers, Samuel. He was supposed to meet me, but he's gone. I don't know where he went." The blacksmith stopped hammering and looked at her more closely now. His expression softened just slightly, and he sighed, wiping his hands on his apron. "Samuel's gone, huh?" he said quietly. "I figured as much." Eleanor felt a pang of sadness, but she tried to stay composed. "Do you know where he went? Or why he left?" The blacksmith shook his head. "I don't know. All I know is that he's not coming back. He left town in a hurry. I've been here a long time, and I've seen a lot of people come and go. Some stay, some don't. Samuel, well, he wasn't the kind to stick around for long." Eleanor's chest tightened. It was becoming clear that Samuel had not been the man she had imagined. But hearing the blacksmith's words, she began to wonder about him. Who was this man who had stayed behind when everyone else had left? Why had he chosen to stay in this empty, dying town? "My name's Eleanor," she said after a long pause, her voice softer now. "I don't know anyone here, and I don't have anywhere to go." The blacksmith studied her for a long moment as if weighing her words. Finally, he nodded. "I'm William," he said simply. "I've been living here for years. It's not much, but it's home." There was a long silence, and for the first time since she had arrived, Eleanor didn't feel quite as alone. William wasn't offering her promises of a better life, and he wasn't pretending that everything would be okay. He was just being honest, which was more than she had gotten from anyone else in the town. Maybe that was enough. "I know it's not much," William continued, "but if you're looking for somewhere to stay, there's room here. I have a small cabin nearby. It's not fancy, but it'll keep you out of the wind." Eleanor blinked, surprised by his offer. She hadn't expected kindness, not from someone like him, and certainly not from someone who had chosen to remain in a place like this. But there was something in his eyes, something that told her he understood what it was like to be alone, to be stuck in a place you never thought you'd be. "Thank you," Eleanor said, her voice a little shakier than she had intended. "I don't want to impose, but I don't know what else to do." William nodded. "No imposition. We all have our reasons for being here. You're not the only one who's had to make a new start." He didn't say anything more, and neither did Eleanor. But in that moment she realized that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she had thought. As they stood there, the quiet between them seemed more like a shared understanding than an uncomfortable silence. William returned to his work, the sound of the hammer ringing out once again, but this time Eleanor didn't feel the weight of her isolation quite so heavily. For the first time since she had arrived, she felt like she might have a place here. No promises, no guarantees, but a chance. She stood there for a moment longer, watching the blacksmith as he worked. She wasn't sure what would happen next, or what her future in this strange town would look like. But she had a place to rest, at least for tonight, and maybe that was enough for now. Eleanor stood there on the edge of the small station, her heart still racing. The man who had met her on the platform, his name was James, didn't seem to know much more than what he had already told her. Samuel was gone, and that was all she knew. The confusion in her mind was like a thick fog that refused to lift, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Samuel had promised to meet her here. They had exchanged so many letters, each one full of hope and excitement. How could he just leave her with no explanation? The longer Eleanor stood in the cold evening air, the heavier her thoughts became. "Where's the town?" she finally managed to ask. Her voice sounded small even to herself. James nodded in the direction of a narrow, dusty road. "It's not far. Follow the path and you'll see it soon enough." Eleanor glanced at the road. It looked empty, silent, and isolated. The sun was beginning to dip behind the mountains, casting long shadows over the land, and the wind had a chill that made her wrap her shawl tighter around her shoulders. She had imagined this moment so many times during the long train ride, the excitement of meeting Samuel, of finally being with him in his new life. But now she was facing the reality of being completely alone, in a strange place with no idea of what would happen next. Taking a deep breath, Eleanor turned and started walking down the road, her footsteps echoing in the silence around her. The wind rustled through the dry grass, and the only sound besides her own footsteps was the distant cry of a bird. She tried to push the unsettling thoughts away, but they clung to her, whispering doubts into her mind. What had happened to Samuel? Why had he left without a word? As she walked, the buildings of the town began to come into view. At first, it looked like any small frontier town with a few scattered houses and a dusty street. But as she got closer, she saw the truth. The town was falling apart. The wooden buildings were weathered and decaying, with broken windows and sagging roofs. Some houses had missing doors, others had no windows at all. It was clear that no one had cared for this place in years. It was as though time had stopped here, and no one had bothered to fix what was broken. Eleanor's heart sank as she walked deeper into the town. She had expected a small, quiet community, perhaps with a few families, but this was not what she had imagined. The town felt like a ghost town, abandoned by the people who once lived there. The silence was suffocating, and she couldn't help but feel the weight of it pressing down on her chest. It was as though the town itself was mourning the loss of life, and now she was the only one left to witness it. She continued walking, her eyes searching for any sign of life. There were no children playing in the streets, no women hanging laundry, no men working the fields. There was no sign of Samuel. She had expected to be greeted with warmth, perhaps a few smiles, but instead, there was only emptiness. Finally, she came upon a small building that seemed slightly more intact than the others. It looked like a store or maybe a saloon. The door creaked open as she pushed it, and she stepped inside. The room was dimly lit with dust motes floating in the air. There were a few tables scattered around, but no one was sitting at them. The bar was empty and the shelves behind it were bare. The bartender, an older man with a gruff face, glanced up at her as she entered. "Looking for someone?" he asked, his voice low and rough. Eleanor hesitated. She didn't know what to say. The word Samuel had promised her felt like a lifetime ago. "I'm looking for Samuel," she said finally, her voice sounding uncertain even to herself. The bartender raised an eyebrow. "Samuel, you mean the man who disappeared a few days ago?" Eleanor nodded, her heart skipping a beat. "Yes, that's him," the bartender shrugged. "Ain't much to say. He left town in a hurry, said he'd be back, but I ain't seen him since." Eleanor felt a cold wave of disappointment wash over her. She had hoped for even just a moment that Samuel would show up and explain everything, but now it seemed like she was just another person left behind in the dust. "Do you know where he went?" she asked, though she already feared she knew the answer. The bartender shook his head. "No one knows. He was supposed to meet you, right? Well, you're on your own now." Eleanor stood there, the weight of his words sinking deep into her chest. She didn't know what to do next. It felt like her entire world had crumbled in an instant. She had traveled all this way, left everything she knew behind, only to find herself alone in a town that seemed to have forgotten its own existence. Her eyes scanned the room, desperate for something familiar, something that could offer comfort, but there was nothing. There was just the bartender, the empty tables, and the dust in the air. It was the loneliest place she had ever been. With no other choice, Eleanor left the saloon and stepped back out into the street. The sun was nearly gone now, and the town seemed even quieter in the fading light. She walked aimlessly, not sure where to go or what to do. She passed the ruins of what might have once been a grand house, now just a shell of its former self. In the distance, she could see the faint outline of the hills, and beyond that, the vast emptiness of the land stretched as far as the eye could see. She sat down on a broken fence post, staring out at the empty streets, trying to figure out what to do. The decision she had made so eagerly, the dream of a new life, suddenly felt like a cruel joke. How had it all gone wrong? How had she ended up here, in a ghost town with nothing but the echoes of lost lives around her? As the evening grew darker, Eleanor tried to gather her thoughts. She knew she couldn't stay in the street forever. She needed a place to rest, somewhere to figure out what to do next. She thought back to the man, James, who had met her at the station. He had seemed like someone who knew the town well, but she wasn't sure she could trust him. Still, he was the only person she had met who wasn't completely distant or aloof. She got up and walked back toward the town center, determined to find James again. Perhaps he knew more than he had let on. If Samuel wasn't coming back, maybe she could at least figure out how to survive in this place. The town might be falling apart, but Eleanor wasn't ready to give up just yet. She had come this far and she couldn't turn back now. There was no going back to her old life, no returning to the safety of her family. She had taken this chance and now she had to make it work. With each step, Eleanor's heart grew heavier. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. She would not let this town, this empty, abandoned place, swallow her whole. She would find a way to survive, even if it meant starting over completely. The dream she had once held so dearly was slipping away, but maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance to make something new out of it. Coast? She often felt like she was living a life that wasn't hers. It wasn't that she disliked her family or her home. She loved them both dearly. But there was something deep inside her, something she couldn't quite explain, that told her there was more to life than the world she knew. Her friends had all married young, settled into comfortable routines, and had children. But Eleanor's dreams were different. She wanted adventure, she wanted change, and most of all, she wanted to escape the small, predictable life that seemed to stretch endlessly before her. When Eleanor was 24, she had an idea that seemed both daring and strange. She would become a mail-order bride. The idea first came to her when she read a letter in the local newspaper about women being offered the chance to start fresh out west. The ad promised new opportunities, a chance at a new life, and perhaps a husband who would cherish her. The West was still a land of promise, unsettled, wild, and full of potential. The more Eleanor thought about it, the more the idea seemed to spark something in her heart. Her friends had questioned the decision, of course. "You don't even know these men," they'd said, eyebrows raised in doubt. But to Eleanor, it wasn't about the man. It was about the chance to escape. It was about taking control of her own destiny instead of waiting for something to happen. She dreamed of wide-open spaces, a house surrounded by land, and maybe even a family of her own someday. The thought of it all made her heart beat faster. She could picture it clearly in her mind: fresh air, new faces, and a world that was hers to discover. One day, after weeks of reading the letters and dreaming about her new life, Eleanor finally made the decision. She wrote a letter back to the man she had been corresponding with for the past few weeks. His name was Samuel, and he lived in a small town in the western United States. He was a rancher, he told her, and had been struggling with loneliness for years. His letters spoke of a simple, happy life, working with the land, caring for animals, and building a family. Samuel was kind, and his words were sincere. Eleanor could sense the longing in his messages, and it matched her own. Within a week, she received a reply. Samuel was eager to have her join him. He made arrangements for her to travel to his ranch, promising to meet her at the train station upon her arrival. He spoke of his excitement to meet her in person, and for the first time in a long while, Eleanor felt a surge of hope. She packed her bags, said a quick goodbye to her parents, and boarded the train that would take her far away from everything she had known. The journey was long, spanning several days. As the train rolled westward, Eleanor looked out the window at the changing landscape. She saw the green, rolling hills of the east give way to the flat plains and wide, endless skies of the west. The further she traveled, the more the world seemed to open up. And with every passing mile, her excitement grew. She imagined herself in a big house, perhaps with a garden of wildflowers, a cozy fire crackling in the fireplace. Samuel's letters had painted a picture of the life she had always dreamed of. But as the days wore on, Eleanor also felt an unexpected wave of nerves. What if Samuel wasn't as he seemed? What if the reality of her new life didn't match the dreams she'd built? She shook these thoughts away. She had already made the choice, and there was no turning back now. She would have to face whatever awaited her with strength, just as she always had. When the train finally pulled into the station, Eleanor's heart raced. The bustling station was crowded with people coming and going, but she didn't see Samuel's face among the crowd. She looked again, scanning the faces, but he was nowhere to be found. Her heart sank. She waited for an hour, then 2, but there was still no sign of him. The bustling station around her slowly faded into a blur. She began to feel a tight knot in her stomach, a creeping sense of unease. Was something wrong? Had he forgotten about her? Or worse, had he changed his mind? As the sun began to set, the crowd thinned, and Eleanor was left standing alone on the platform, clutching her bag. She wondered what she should do. She didn't have much money, and she didn't know where to go. She was stranded in a strange town, far away from everything she had known. Just as she was about to give up, a man approached her. He looked around the same age as Samuel had described, with broad shoulders and a rough, weathered face. But he didn't look like someone who would greet a woman with excitement. There was something tired about him, something distant. "You the one they call Eleanor?" he asked gruffly. His voice sounded tired, like someone who had been carrying a heavy burden for too long. Eleanor nodded, her heart pounding. "Yes, I'm Eleanor." The man sighed deeply. "Samuel's gone," he said, his eyes avoiding hers. "He left town. He told me to tell you to wait for him." Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. "Gone? Where did he go?" "I don't know," the man said. "I just know he ain't coming back." Eleanor stood there in shock, unable to process what he was saying. Samuel was gone, and she was left alone in this strange town with no place to go, no way to get back home. For a long moment, Eleanor stood still, feeling a mix of confusion, anger, and fear. What was she supposed to do now? She couldn't return home after making this decision. She had promised herself a new life, and she couldn't give up on that so easily. As the man began to turn away, Eleanor took a deep breath. "What do I do now?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The man looked back at her, his face softening for the first time. "I guess you'll have to make your own way," he said. And with that, Eleanor's journey, the one she had imagined so many times in her dreams, took an unexpected and uncertain turn.